You're listening to the British Baseball Podcast. Hello baseball fans, time for another episode of the British Baseball Podcast. This week I'm talking to Brighton Baseball's very own Matt Locke. He put out a little story not too long ago about his dad and Hank Aaron and the Japanese Babe Ruth, whose name I've forgotten. Should have wrote this down before I started this introduction. Apologies, Japanese Babe Ruth. Probably won't listen anyway. But in this episode, Matt talks to us about his time with his dad and baseball. Some really nice story. There's also a link in the description for the full article if you want to have a read of it. I really hope you enjoy this one. I really had a great time interviewing Matt over this one. If you want to come on the show and tell us any of your baseball stories, or you think there's somebody out there that has a great tale, get in touch with the show, britishbaseballpodcast@gmail.com. Let me know. Or you can get me on the social medias at BritBaseballPod. So let's get into this episode. And joining me now is Matt Locke of the Brighton Baseball Club. Matt, how are we doing?
Good, thanks. It's lovely and sunny here in Brighton. Exactly the kind of day that actually we'd probably rather be out at the Diamond, but there you go.
Yeah. We've actually been graced with a bit of sunshine today in Salford, which it just looks nice. It's still very cold. I mean, it's one of those picturesque days where the temperature just is a complete fib. You've agreed to join us today to share one of your stories. I read an article that you wrote not too long after the passing of Hank Aaron, and it was a lovely story and a great thing. And I was intrigued to find out a bit more. So thank you for agreeing to come onto the podcast and telling the lovely British baseball public this tale. So Matt, before we get started, do you want to tell us a bit about how you and your family got involved in baseball?
Yeah, this goes right back to 1986. So I kind of grew up in a town called Hodgeston, which is a very dull commuter town, about kind of 20 minutes, half an hour north of London. And my dad was a builder and would all be working on lots of different sites. And we were at Wolfram Abbey Market, which is not far away from where we grew up, with my dad one day, me and my twin brother and my older brother, who's 2 years older. And he bumped into a guy called Louis Courtney, who he'd worked on sites with for many, many years. And this was 1986. So to set the scene for some of the younger members of your audience, we'd just had the launch a couple of years earlier of a new TV channel called Channel 4. And Channel 4 obviously couldn't get the rights to all the UK sports. And they were also supposed to be this alternative channel. And they actually got the rights for the very first time to broadcast NFL. And for a couple of years, they'd been broadcasting NFL, and it became quite cool and quite trendy in the UK. People went into the Chicago Bears, and one of their players, the Fridge at the time, and they became kind of minor celebrities. So as a teenager, as I was then, I was 14 in 1986, American sports were kind of cool, particularly if you were, thinking of yourselves as a bit alternative and maybe not into the things that all your mates at your secondary school were into and trying to look for something different. So we bump into, this is the scene, we bump into Louis Courtney, and I didn't know at the time, and my dad had never mentioned it. I don't think Louis had ever mentioned it, but Louis had a long history in British baseball. He was one of the people that set up the Wolfram Abbey Arrows that are now the Essex Arrows. And so Louis and his brother Dave had been part of the UK baseball scene since, the kind of 50s and 60s, I think, even going back that far. So Louis saw us and was chatting to us, and then he looked at these three kind of teenage kids and said, "Oh, you guys look about old enough to play baseball now." So our ears pricked up at that because, this was a cool American sport that even our friends hadn't got involved in. And so Louis basically brought a load of kit along, and we organised a bunch of our friends from our secondary school. And we all went off to a local park after school one day, and Louis brought some bats and gloves, and we all started throwing around. And that's really how baseball started for me. It was a completely random occasion of my dad bumping into an old work colleague in Wolfram Abbey Market.
What was it about baseball then for you over other sports? Was it just you were into alternate stuff that your mates weren't into, or did it just really capture you straight away because it was different?
I think it was initially it was because it was this cool American sport that no one had heard of. But I think once you've actually put a glove on and started throwing a ball around, there's just this really lovely kind of almost kind of grace to just playing baseball. It's got a lovely kind of rhythm to it. I was quite tall as a kid, so I was quite good at basketball which we actually had a basketball team in our secondary school, but I was really quite rubbish at football and cricket. I wasn't, kind of very good at football. And in UK schools, if you're not one of the best at football, it's just really frustrating to play because no one ever passes to you and it's just rubbish. And I just loved the kind of tactics of baseball. I loved the kind of routines of every play and the way that everyone gets involved in the game, even if you're in one of those positions that don't necessarily see a lot of the ball on the field, everyone gets to bat. But I think it was partly just as a teenage kid, it was partly the equipment. It was the gloves looked really cool and the bats were obviously cool, and the whole kind of thing just looked really deeply cool.
Yeah, I remember having a baseball mitt as a present that I wanted. I never got it because I'm like when you said about Channel 4 launching the American sports stuff, I remember the American football being on at that time, and that's, I think, one of the early things I enjoyed about it, because I was the same. I was never very good at football because basically I supported a team that wasn't Manchester United in a school full of Manchester United fans. So yeah, looking for something else that wasn't football, the American sports had the appeal. Especially
I mean,
being on like
this is why I'm into the Red Sox as well, because actually Channel 4 that year in 1986 broadcast some highlights of the World Series. I don't think they showed it live. I think they showed kind of highlights of the games. And it was the Red Sox versus the Mets. And it's a very famous one where the first baseman, Bill, oh man, I've just forgotten his second name. Basically, the Red Sox needed to make one out to win in the sixth game, and the ball trundled along first base, and the guy went down to get it at first base, and it just went between his legs, and you can see the videos on YouTube. He almost crumbles to the floor, and then the Red Sox lost that sixth game and then lost the seventh. And I didn't know at the time about the curse of the Bambino and how long it had been since the Red Sox had won the World Series, but we all chose the Red Sox because the only reason we did was because we were all big fans of the sitcom Cheers that was on Channel 4 at the time. And in that, the main guy that runs the bar, played by Ted Danson, is a pitcher for the Red Sox, the next pitcher. So we'd heard of the Red Sox, but we hadn't heard of the Mets. Because, of course, this is like 1986. There's no internet. There's no kind of, it's really hard to find out about baseball in the UK. So we all just chose the Red Sox. And I didn't realize that I was signing. But I'm a Spurs fan. So actually, I kind of feel like there's a link between the Red Sox and the Spurs. We're both like big teams, but yet we never really win as much as everyone thinks we should have. So as a fan of Tottenham Hotspur, it felt like the Red Sox was the appropriate baseball team to follow.
Fair enough. So let's go back a bit to your younger days. Your dad set up a baseball team. Is that right?
Yeah. So basically, Lou Courtney came along, and he lived a fair amount away from. Long enough away from where we grew up. So he ran a couple of practices with us, but it became quickly obvious that he couldn't, keep doing it. So he kind of bailed out after a couple of practices. And my dad saw how we were all getting into it and just decided to take on that role. So he ended up setting up, we formed a junior team called the Hoddesdon Sharks, which we set up with our friends. There's about 14 of us, I think, that used to play. And my dad got in touch with the BBF and found out that there was a local youth league. There are a few teams around Hertfordshire in the north and London that we used to play. We actually used to come down to Brighton as well when we got older. And so basically he then took it on, and he fell in love with the sport as well. And so did my mum. My mum really loves the sport. So we just became a baseball family, and my dad ran the club for many years. Even when we got older and we kind of moved away. Eventually we kind of merged with the Essex Arrows, I think, the players we all moved over to the Essex Arrows and worked as a youth team for Wolf Medby Arrows for a while. And then I played for them a bit when I was in my late teens and 20s. But I played until the age of 18 and then went up to Glasgow to go to art school and didn't play there just because I didn't think I knew at the time that baseball was going on in Glasgow. And again, this is pre-internet, so it's much harder to find out what was going on.
Yeah.
But I used to come down in the holidays and in summer and then play again for the Arrows. And then I moved down to Brighton to do an MA after Glasgow this would have been about 94, 95. And because the adult league at that time was across most of the south of England, I rejoined the Arrows again and played for them for a couple of years with my dad in summer when I was moving up from Brighton. So yeah, so I kind of played off and on from the age of 14 to my kind of early 20s.
Yeah, and in the article that you wrote, you mentioned there's a bit in there about you got involved in the Great Britain under 18 setup and quite a Would you say it was a historic game?
It was, but it's kind of important to remember how, how unkind. I mean, it's interesting. There's a couple of guys on the Brighton team, Nathan and Alfie, and Al and a few others, and Django that play in the GB team now, and it's just so much better. This is like in the late 80s, early 90s. It was, still it was such a small sport, and there was nowhere near the kind of coaching that in the UK that we had then. So we'd basically played in the youth league in the BBF for a couple of years in BBF South, and a guy from Hull had organised a kind of Southern Youth League versus Northern Youth League All-Stars team. So they'd pulled together some of the players from the BBF South Youth Leagues and formed a scratch team to play against the BBF North. So I was in out along with my brother, and we played in that All-Stars game. And then a couple of weeks later, the same guy from Hull rang up and said, do you fancy playing for Great Britain? And basically what had happened is the MLB has sent over a kind of friendship tour of 2 high school teams. I think it was the Ausable Valley Patriots and can't remember the name of the other team, but basically 2 high school teams. And they'd come over and had done like a friendship tour in the UK, mainly playing the best adult teams over here. Even though the kids were all under 18, they were obviously jocks and been playing baseball since they basically stood up. So they were really good. But they decided obviously to try and get together a youth under 18 team. I don't know if it was the first, I doubt if it was the first under 18 team, but it definitely wasn't an organized program like it is now. Yeah. We literally just got a phone call and then we all kind of met up, and we'd met each other playing games and playing in the, I knew most of the BBF South players. There was one guy who was a kind of Japanese young guy who was actually younger than me. I must have been about 16 at the time, and he was like 14, and he was a pitcher. But most of us were pretty rubbish. It's like really difficult to imagine now, but we couldn't get YouTube videos teaching us how the mechanics of the game. We didn't have access to mobile phones to record our swings and our throwing, so we were effectively cosplaying baseball. We were kind of like a cosplaying sport because it was so difficult to get access to any video or any kind of resources. We used to get kind of Xerox training manuals sent over by people that were shipping baseball gear into the UK, but it was really, really hard to kind of actually get good training. We used to go and see the Enfield Spartans run by Jack Akers around the time that Oscar Marcelino used to play for them. So Oscar Marcelino, the dad of Bradley Marcelino, who's now a really good trainer. Bradley was like, 7, 8 years old when I used to go and see the Spartans play. And we used to get some training off of Oscar, and he was like, and Jack Akers and the guys at Enfield Spartans, but they were like some of the best things. So anyway, so we get this GB team together and we play these high school kids, and it was a kind of an official Sport England represented, game, and it was in Luton, and they'd kind of drawn a diamond out in Luton. No dirt or anything, just drawn out, and the local mayor came along, and we all got uniforms, and we got a load of new gear from Rawlings, and we all got to play. And we got absolutely hammered. We really did get completely. I think it was like 17-0 after 7 innings, and I think that was with a cap on the inning score. I mean, we were cheering foul tips because these guys had curves and sliders and pitches that none of us had ever seen in youth baseball in the UK. So it was great to play. But yeah, there was actually Jack Akers, who used to run the Spartans, also ran Spartan Sports, that used to ship like gear and merch and gloves and stuff over from the US. So he used to supply a lot of the teams in London at the time. And they'd actually, Good Morning America had sent over a video crew to film this kind of match between these American kids and these English kids. And so we were all filmed for Good Morning America. And months later, Jack managed to he got somebody to record it on video on NTSC, which none of us had ever heard of because it didn't work in the video players we had in the UK. But he managed to get it transferred, and we watched the little clip, and it's hilarious because it's like a little insert on the breakfast TV show, and they kind of cut to the VT and the reporters there in Luton in this field saying, yeah, and but England's getting interested in baseball, and they interview the 2 teams, and they interview the Americans, and they're all like, built like brick shit houses, and they're all just under 18 and really good players. And they ask, do you think you're going to win? And they're like, well, we can't underestimate the opponents, but we think we stand a good chance. And then they cut to us. So we're like the Bad News Bears. We're all different heights and weights, and just, this complete ragtag bunch of kids who've been pulled together to play this game. And they asked us the same question. They said, do you think you're going to win? And there's this brilliant beat where we all kind of just look at each other and then just turn to the camera and go, nah. Like that. We weren't under any kind of illusions about how good we were at baseball.
Yeah, that's cracking. So when you went away to university in 1990, what happened to the team with your dad?
Well, my dad kept running it, and this is like the really lovely thing. And many years later, my mum kind of said, you realize that actually when you've got three boys, it was just three boys in our family, and we grew up in it was an all right town, but it wasn't brilliant, and there wasn't an awful lot to do. And I think they were always worried that we were going to go off and get into drugs or crime or something like that. And I think my dad just jumped at baseball because it was something that he could do with us. And I think, particularly I've now got teenagers myself, and you realize, under lockdown, obviously we're seeing them every day, but normally they would be out all the time and you wouldn't really know what they're up to. And I think my dad just loved doing it because it brought him closer to us, but he just really fell in love with the sport. And he ended up being I think he was like either the first or one of the early BBF youth officers for a short period of time. He was BBF youth officer. And that led to him going to America, which, he's this working class guy who'd just been kind of working on building sites his whole life. And baseball kind of sent him to LA, because in 1990, when I'd gone off to Glasgow to go to university, the BBF got asked to send a youth delegation to the World Children's Baseball and Software Fair, which was in LA that year. And so my dad was asked to basically chaperone a group of kids. That included actually John Boyd, who now runs BS UK, which I found out on Twitter a couple of years ago. John got in touch with some memories of my dad on that tour, which was just really lovely. I remember playing the Windsor Bears when we were the Hodgson Sharks, and John had set up this, Windsor youth team. So kind of I'll go back to the same era of baseball that John does. And my dad went to LA with this group of kids. He'd never been to America in his life, and he got to fly out and go to this children's baseball fair. I was too old, sadly, so I didn't get a chance to go and do it. But he absolutely loved it, and that's where he met Hank Aaron and Sadaharu. So basically, they were at this World Children's Baseball Fair, and as part of it, they had, Hank Aaron, one of the best hitters baseball's ever produced, and sadly died just a few months ago. And he was kind of doing a throw around and a Q&A with Sadaharu, one of the best, the Japanese Babe Ruth, one of the best sluggers in the Japanese game ever. And they were throwing balls around and kind of, getting photographs with the kids and stuff like that. And they threw a couple of balls in that they'd been using together into the audience, and my dad caught one, and this is it. This is actually the ball that, sadly, he was a bit too shy to go up and get Hank Aaron and Sadaharu to sign it, because if he did, it'd probably be worth a lot of money. But he kind of kept this on his sideboard for years, and then when he died a couple of years ago, sadly, my mum kind of gave it to me, and I have this in my baseball bag, and it goes with me to the Diamond in Brighton every time I go and practice or play. And it's never thrown and never used, but it's just there as a kind of link back to, my dad and that moment with Hank Aaron and Sadaharu.
It's amazing. That's lovely. And that's what sort of led on to this conversation. I'll leave the links to the article that you wrote in the show notes as well. So if anyone that's interested to read a bit more about this great tale, just have a look through there, and underneath all my scribble, there'll be a nice little link there from the piece that Matt's written. Matt, this is sort of coming towards the end of our chat. It's been lovely. I leave the last word open to the guests. So have you got any shout outs you'd like to give, or any parting words?
Just the team in Brighton. So I started playing again. It's kind of linked to my dad. He was ill, sadly, with prostate cancer for quite a few years, and he came down to see us in Brighton, and I knew that there's a team in Brighton because we used to drive along the road where there's a little sign saying, Brighton Baseball Club over at Waterhall. And we'd been to Waterhall when we were, in our late teens, 20s to play, but it felt like a long time ago. And then what had happened is life had happened. I'd gone to university. I'd ended up traveling the country for work, getting a family, having young kids, just never having the time. And I used to see this sign and always think, I'd really love to play baseball again. And just never really felt like I had the time to do it. And then just when my dad was really ill, one of the last times he came down to see us in Brighton, I kind of looked on the website and said, let's go watch a game at Brighton. And sadly, it wasn't on after I think they'd managed to get the players together or something. Yeah. But a few years later, after my dad died, my mum came down to stay with us for a while. And I said, let's go watch a game. So we went along and went to Waterhall and saw a game in their single A's players. And it just I was aching. I mean, it's a lovely ground at Waterhall. It's out in the, just out in the country, and it's got the downs behind it. And it was a sunny day, and and there are a couple of players out there that are also in their 40s, and I kind of looked at it and just thought, God, man, I was just like aching to get out on the diamond again. So I kind of went and found who was running it, Robin Banerjee, and said, can I come along and practice? And so I came along the following Wednesday, and I've been playing ever since now. So I've been back playing a couple of years under no illusions about whether I'm any good or not, but it's just so lovely. And it just reminds me of my dad. And actually in the first season, when I started playing again, because he always used to umpire all the games, and he was completely self-taught, and, probably a really rubbish umpire, but somebody has to do it. And in the first season, we had a couple of friendlies, and somebody asked me to kind of umpire a game. And my mum had given me the clicker that my dad had from when he used to umpire, and I had that in my bag. So I was like, yeah, great. So I put all the gear on, and I stood behind the plate, and I suddenly realized that, I was in my mid to late 40s, probably the same age that my dad was when he used to umpire that. And there was this moment of just suddenly feeling like I've become my father. I've basically become my dad. So, I mean, I really want to give a shout out to Brighton, because I actually think it really helped a lot with, like, remembering my dad and the grief of my dad dying, just being out on a diamond. And every time I go there, I kind of think of him. And the team are just fantastic, Shane and Jared and Django and Jose and, just Jorge and just everyone else that is involved in the club. They're really welcoming. They're really they're in baseball for the right reasons. They want to play great baseball, but they want to have great fun and have a nice time doing it. So the Brighton Baseball Club have just been, really, really huge for me in the last couple of years. I've just been helping me get fit a lot, helping me just love playing ball again, however badly I play it. It's just really great to be out on the diamond. So yeah, if anyone's interested in even trying, actually just today, I just had a phone call with my brother, who normally goes away every summer. He lives near Guildford, and he actually came to see us when Brighton played Guildford season before last. But because he's normally away in summer, he never really gets a chance. Because of lockdown, he's here this summer. So I was just like saying to him, go and join the Guildford Mouse, go and play with Chris and the guys over there. So he's literally just made contact with them today. So my twin brother is going to be playing baseball again. And there's a chance that we might end up playing each other this summer if the league kicks off in May, as we're hoping it will. So yeah, I might have a twin versus twin baseball game, Guildford versus Brighton, coming up sometime in summer, which would be marvelous. So yeah, so if you're interested at all in getting baseball, I just recommend it so much, because it's just a hell of a lot of fun.
Brilliant. Perfect. Matt, what a great way to end this one. Again, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you and possibly your twin on the mound someday.
So I'm not on the mound, but yeah, seeing you on the diamond someday. Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Matt.
Take care, mate. Ta-ra.